handing this off to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight to travel north in Michigan, to the shores and to the trees and the forest, to some of the critters that live around us. So really happy that you're here to hear some stories. So I spent all of my life with my compass headed north, even though I was from Detroit, Michigan. All I wanted to do was head north and go into the woods and be near the waters of northern Michigan. And so at a very young age, I started to venture north. And when I was in college, I went to school in the Upper Peninsula at a bug camp, at a forestry camp. Then I spent a summer as a forester. I spent many summers in canoes and bicycles. And then more recently, I spent 10 years traveling northern Michigan with the Michigan Great Outdoor Culture Tour, part of the Michigan Humanities Council, where I was able to share the stories that we're going to hear tonight with people cozied around the campfire when they were camping out in northern Michigan, enjoying our wonderful summers up here. So I welcome you to join me in the stories that I'm going to share tonight, but I want to start with a poem that I wrote many years ago. And this poem tries to capture some of the beautiful scenes and moments of northern Michigan. Now there's a stanza in the poem. When I say in Michigan, you're going to say the Northland. Let's try that. In Michigan, the Northland. All right. Here's my poem. In Michigan, the Northland. A familiar rocky shoreline, sandy beaches, balsam fir, green spires pointing skyward into blue in Michigan, the Northland. A loon call, waking me from sleep, staring up at dark, jeweled skies in Michigan, the Northland. Northern lights, streaks of color dancing across the sky as I whistle a tune for them in Michigan, the Northland. A canoe paddle held firmly in my hands at the stern of a fully loaded canoe, traveling old fur trade routes in Michigan, the Northland. A field filled with colors of knapweed and fireweed, picking thimbleberries on the warm, soft days of summer in Michigan, the Northland. A hint of amber in gold in the leaves of maple and birch, hinting winter's return in August in Michigan, the Northland. A journey on snowshoes through inches of freshly fallen snow, hauling sleds with wood for fires to warm us in Michigan, the Northland. A hot sauna burning, steam rising from the rocks, soothing aching muscles after a day's work in the woods in Michigan, the Northland. A sunset on Superior, Gitchigumi the Great One, oar boats moving in the distance, falling asleep on a bed of sand in Michigan, the Northland. Stories to be told of the Anishinabeg, the people of this place, of miners and loggers, lighthouses and ships, immigrant lives made new with hope in Michigan, the Northland. A deep reunion each time I go, with memories made and yet to be. A quiet comfort settles in. My final destiny, Michigan, the Northland. So I share that poem with you all to kindle some feelings of the North as we head into the stories this evening. And I have to light the candle in my old story lamp before I can tell you any other Michigan story. Now this lamp came to me in a special way many years ago. And when I found this lamp, I knew I was to be the next carrier of this lamp. And that whenever we told stories, especially Michigan tales, we would light the candle inside of this old and precious lamp. So let me share with you a little bit about the story lamp. Many years ago, when I was still a teacher, I had something really special back in those days. It was called summer vacation. And because I didn't have to teach in the summertime, I never stayed home. I always went on amazing adventures. Well, one year, I decided when school let out that I was going to load up my truck with all my camping gear, you know, a sleeping bag and a cook stove and a tent and some food and bug spray, and of course, a box with nothing else in it but marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate bars. After I got fully loaded up, I got into my truck and I pointed it north and I started to drive until I got to the Mackinac Bridge. And when I got to the bridge, my heart began to pound a little harder, for it was a sunny day and the waters of the Straits of Mackinac were sparkling, and there was a great big oar boat coming in the distance. And I looked up at the pointy trees and the rocky shoreline of the Upper Peninsula, and I knew it was going to be a great summer. Well, once in the Upper Peninsula, I started to camp out, and I picked a different place by the water every single night. I went all the way up to the Pictured Rock shoreline, and I camped on Lake Superior for 3 nights. I went back down to Lake Michigan, and I camped there for a few more. And then for the next several weeks, I camped out all across the Upper Peninsula until one night, I was headed up the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan. I was headed to a place called Fort Wilkins State Park at the very tip of that peninsula. The sun was going down as I drove north until I came to a small town. The name of the town was Amique. It was quiet, and no one was out playing in the yards, and no one was sitting on the porches, and a shiver ran down my spine. I thought I was in a Michigan ghost town, and all I wanted to do was get out of there. As I sped up and made the turn towards the north end of town, there was one store that was still open, and I decided to go in, for my curiosity won out over my fear. And when I walked into that store, I saw that it was filled with incredible old things from our Michigan history. The ceilings were low, the lights were dim, and I started to wander through the store until I came into a corner where I saw this old lamp hanging on an iron hook in the corner of the store. I thought it was the neatest old lamp that I had ever seen, and so I carefully reached up and took that lantern down off the hook, and I was holding it, wondering how old it was and wondering where it came from, when the man who owned that store came over to talk to me. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about what he looked like, for he was an older man. He wasn't any taller than I was, but he had white, wispy hair sticking out all over the sides of his head. He had no hair on the top of his head. In fact, there was a gentle glow coming from his bald spot back up to the ceiling. He wore a pair of reading glasses that were sitting so far down on his nose, I thought they were going to fall off. And when I looked down, I saw he was wearing a pair of old blue jean work pants that were hanging down so low on his hips, it made me a little nervous. I wondered why his pants were hanging down so low, but then I thought, he's an older man. He has sat around this store for years and years. He has time to talk with everyone who comes in, even me. And because he sat around that store for so many years, he had gained a pot belly that stuck out in front. That's why his pants were hanging down so low. He couldn't pull them up over that belly any longer. The only thing holding him up were a pair of wide red suspenders clipped to the top of those pants. And I knew that was the only thing holding up his pants, because at one point he turned around to get something off the table behind us. And when he turned around, I was greeted by what I refer to as a vertical smile down his backside. I was really happy when he turned back around again, so I didn't have to look at that anymore. We talked for a while, you know, the usual, where are you going? Where are you from? And then he looked at me over those glasses on his nose and he asked me the strangest question. He asked, "You like my lufta, don't you?" I said, "I like your what?" He said, "You really like my lufta, don't you?" I said, "Are you talking about the lamp?" He answered me, "Oh, yes." I said, "Can you tell me anything about it?" He said, "Oh, yes." Now he took that lantern out of my hands and he put it down on the table nearby, and he told me that he couldn't tell the story without lighting the candle that was still inside. So I watched and waited as he lit the candle inside the lamp, and once it was lit, he could tell me the story of where it came from. He told me the lamp was close to 150 years old, and I was impressed. But then he told me that this old lamp had always belonged to the same family. Their last name was Quevola. They had come from the country of Finland long ago. They had moved to our beautiful state of Michigan, but they moved to the Upper Peninsula to work in the copper mines. And when they came to Michigan, why, they brought this lamp with them. When I asked the owner why it was so important to bring the lamp all the way from Finland, he told me what they used to do. He said on cold winter nights, they would wait until it got dark outside the windows of their house. And when it was good and dark out, the children that in that house would run through every room and they would turn off every light. And when it was dark and all the lights had been turned off, they would gather around the lantern in the living room. And then he said it. They would tell each other stories. I said, are you just telling me this to get me to buy the lamp? He said, oh no, true story. I said, why aren't they telling stories around that lantern any longer? And he told me the end of this, which was incredibly sad, but I knew I had to be the next carrier of the story lamp that had traveled so far to Michigan with that family. You see, the children in that family grew up, and when they moved away, they were coming home less as the years went on. No one was coming home to light the candle in that lantern, and they weren't sitting together at night telling those stories. As the years went by, Mom and Dad felt like this house that they had raised their children in was much too big, and so they sold the house and had an auction. And in that auction, one of the things that they let go of was the old story lamp. Now, when I heard that they had let go of the lamp, I asked him how he got it. He said he had gone to that auction and the lamp had been hanging in his store ever since. And then I looked up at him and I said, you have to let me buy it. He said, what are you going to do with that old lamp? I said, I'm going to light the candle. We're going to tell stories around it again. And he smiled and he nodded and he said, I think that's a good idea. Now, I walked out of the store that day with this precious lamp. So many stories have been told around it. And I also walked out with an incredible story that I have been telling ever since that day. But before I left the store, I turned around and I said, what did you call it? He said, you mean lufta? I said, what is that? He said it was a Finnish word, so it came from Finland, right? And it meant lantern. And he asked me to say it, but it came out all wrong. I said, lufta. He looked at me and said, you need some help. I said, I know I do. And he walked over a little bit closer to me and he grabbed my face. He said, try it now. Lufta. He said, now you're talking like a Finn. So, okay, out there, I want you to try this on the count of 3. You got to grab your own face, right? Thanks, Nick. And you got to say lufta. 1, 2, 3, go. Lufta. Now you're talking like a Finn. Good job, you guys. So now that the lantern is lit, we can get busy with some other stories that I want to share with you tonight. So the very first story is a story about our Michigan State reptile, and his name is Painted Turtle. Now, for those of you who are young and young of heart out there, I need to introduce you to Turtle. This is Turtle. Can you say hello to Turtle? Hi, Turtle. Hi, everybody. How you doing out there? We're going to tell my story tonight. I'm really excited about that. So I have to tell you a secret about my friend Turtle, who's been traveling with me for a long time. He's a Michigan reptile, so he's a painted turtle. Red stripe around the shell, yellow tummy, right? And this turtle sleeps in the winter in the mud. And when it warms up outside, like it is now, Turtle comes up out of the mud, warms up, starts moving again, comes up out of the mud where he's active again. So if you've been to a pond lately, you might see those turtles all stacked up on the logs, soaking in the warm sun rays right now. Turtles are reptiles, which means they're cold-blooded, and so they slow down in the wintertime when it's cold, and they hardly move at all. But when it gets warm out, they come back out. But that's not the secret I want to tell you about Turtle. He has a problem, you guys. He likes to talk all the time. Turtle wakes up in the morning, he comes out of his shell like this. Oh boy, it's another day to talk. I'm gonna talk all day. This is gonna be a great day. And our friend Turtle talks all day. At night, he knows he needs to get some sleep, so he climbs into his shell, but you know what? Turtle talks in his sleep. If you put your ear up next to Turtle's shell, you can hear him at night. He sounds like this. And he talks in his sleep so loud that he wakes himself up and he comes back out. Oh boy, it's another day to talk. It's going to be a great day because I'm going to talk all day. And our friend Turtle talks all day. So the other characters in this story about Turtle are the Canada geese. And oh, if you've been down by Lake Michigan, they're all coming back. I've seen them all floating on the water just this week. So if you want to join me, you can get your goosey wings out like this. I'm going to need you to be a flock of geese in this story and flap your wings just a little bit. I'll tell you why we need that a little bit later. You ready for the story? All right. It was the fall of the year. It was getting cold outside. In fact, it was early October and it was already snowing in northern Michigan. All the geese felt the cold and they came down to the shores of Lake Michigan and they were flapping their wings just to stay warm. Let's do some flapping. The old goose said what he always said when it got cold out. He said, "It's getting kind of cold. Time for us to fly down south where it's nice and warm." Every year when it got cold out, the geese would start to get ready for that long journey down south where they would spend the winter. And every year when they were getting ready to go, well, our friend Turtle didn't like the fact that they were leaving. And he would come down to the beach where they were flapping their wings and he would say, "Don't go. Please don't go. Don't leave me here all by myself. No one to talk to in the wintertime." And then our friend Turtle would say it, "Take me with you." And those geese had to look at Turtle and say, "Turtle, you can't come. You don't have wings. Turtles don't fly. You have to stay here this winter, and we promise we'll come home to you in the spring." But Turtle would be so sad that his friends were leaving. He would climb into a shell where he would feel sad for a long time. Now, one year it was only late September, and we remember years like this. It was already snowing in northern Michigan. It was so cold that day, all the geese went down to the shore of Lake Michigan and they were flapping like crazy just to stay warm. The old goose said what he always said, "Getting kind of cold. Time to fly down south where it's nice and warm." But that year, one of the younger geese spoke up and said, "What are we going to do about Turtle? He always gets really sad when we leave." The old goose thought about that, and then he said, "We won't tell him that we're leaving." The goose said, "He's going to see us getting ready. He's going to know we're going to fly down south, and then he's going to say it, 'Take me with you, take me with you.'" The old goose thought for a while, and then he said, "I tell you what, we'll get up really early in the morning. Turtle will still be talking in his sleep. He won't know that we're getting ready to go on that long trip, and Turtle won't have to feel sad, not until the day that we leave." Well, the geese got up the first morning and Turtle was still talking in his sleep. And they flapped their wings and they made it 10 minutes. Pretty good for the first morning of exercise. On the second morning, the sun rose and those geese came down to the beach, but Turtle, he was still talking in his sleep. And they flapped their wings for 20 minutes. They were getting better. The third morning, the sun rose and the geese came down to the beach and our friend Turtle was talking in his sleep. Those geese flapped their wings for 30 minutes that morning. They were getting strong. They knew it was time to leave. On the morning that they were going to leave, Turtle came down to the beach to visit. And he said, "Hey, everybody, what are you doing up so early? I would have gotten up early. We could have started talking early." And then he looked around and he realized that they were going to leave that day. Oh, our friend Turtle said, "Don't go. Please don't go. There's no one to talk to in the wintertime." And then he said it, "Take me with you." And those geese turned and said, "Turtle, we have to tell you this every year. You can't go with us. You don't have wings. Turtles don't fly. We promise we'll come home to you in the spring." But our friend Turtle was so sad that his friends were leaving. He climbed into a shell where he was sad for a long time. Now the geese walked away to go get ready for that trip, but there was one goose who was Turtle's best friend. And you don't walk away from your friends when they're feeling sad. He came over to Turtle and said, "Psst, Turtle, you come out of there. We're going to think of a way to take you with us." And when Turtle heard his friend's voice, he came out and said, "Oh boy, do you think we could think of something? I'd be really happy if we could think of a way where I could go down south with you. We could talk all winter. We could talk all the way down. We could talk all the way home. It would be really great. Turtle, Turtle, come here. You can't talk and think of a good idea at the same time unless you're a mom. We're not moms. Put your head next to mine and we'll think of a good idea." So the goose was thinking, but Turtle couldn't wait. And it wasn't long before he said, "Have you thought of something? I know you're going to think of a good idea. Then you're going to tell me. Then we'll go do it. You're going to think. I'm going to wait. You'll tell me and we'll go do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. Turtle, will you come here, please? Come here. You can't stop talking, can you? I know. I still love you. But I thought of an idea. What'd you think of? What'd you think of? Wait a minute. Can you listen? Okay. I'm going to go down the beach and get a big long stick. I'll bring it back up here. I'm going to bite one end of that stick with my bill. Watch. Chink. You're going to bite the other end with your turtle jaws like this. Chink. Now, if I'm holding on to that end of the stick and you're holding on to that end, all I have to do is flap my wings. Turtle, you're going to fly down south on the end of a stick. What do you think? Good idea. I think it's such a good idea. You should go get the stick. I'll wait for you. You go get the stick and I'll be right here. You're going to bite one end. I'm going to bite one end. We're going to fly. Turtle, could you come here, please? There's one thing you have to remember, or our plan is not going to work. Are you ready? All the way down south, when you're holding on to that stick, you cannot talk to me. If you open up your mouth to talk, you're going to fall off the stick. Yeah, it's a long way down, isn't it, Turtle? What are you going to do? I won't talk. I hope so. The geese went down to the beach and brought back a big long stick. The goose bit one end of that stick. Chink. Turtle went over and grabbed a hold of the other end. Chink. He was holding on for dear life. All those geese started to flap their wings, and Turtle, he took off up in the air, and he was flying for the first time. Turtle could see all of the Lake Michigan shoreline and the beautiful water and the sky. And then he looked down and saw that all his friends had come out of the forest to say goodbye. The deer, porcupine, bear, even the chipmunks. And they looked up and they saw Turtle up there and they said, "Hey, what's Turtle doing up there?" Bear answered the question. "Our friend Turtle learned how to fly." They said, "Bye, Turtle. You have a nice winter." And Turtle looked down and saw his friends, and he couldn't leave them without saying goodbye. And our friend Turtle opened up his mouth and said, "Bye-bye!" Splash! Turtle landed in Lake Michigan. He landed so hard he did a belly smacker. Ouch! And when Turtle landed, something amazing happened. He landed so hard that he cracked his shell in many places, and it was the first time that turtles had cracks in their shell. Turtle watched the geese fly away without him. They weren't going to come back and get him because they were afraid he was going to talk all the way down south. And so he buried himself down in the mud by the shore, and he slept all winter until a beautiful spring day. When it was warm out and the sun was shining, Turtle came up out of the mud. And on that day, guess who came home? All the geese came home. And when they saw their friend Turtle, they said, "Turtle, we're so happy to see you. What happened?" I opened up my mouth." "You did, Turtle, but what happened?" I did a belly smacker." "Oh, Turtle, that must have hurt. Look at my shell. It looks different now." He showed them the cracks in his shell. And Turtle said, "What do you think?" The geese said, "Turtle, we thought you were beautiful before. We think you're even more beautiful now. But Turtle, what did you learn?" Turtle said, "I figured something out. Sometimes it's okay to talk." "Yes, Turtle, that's true. Sometimes it's better to keep your mouth closed." "Yes, Turtle, that's true too." From that day forward, turtles in Michigan sleep in the mud. It has more to do with the fact that they're reptiles and cold-blooded than it does with anything else. But they do come out on spring, warm days in the spring when the sun is shining, and they're always happy when the geese come home because his friends are always happy to talk to Turtle, and that's his story. Good job out there if you were helping with that story. Thanks, you guys. All right, we're going to let Turtle go into his shell and talk in his sleep. So the next story that I want to share with you is right here close to home. And if those of you who are listening live in northern Michigan, you know that we live next to a beautiful place called the Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes. So this is a legend that I heard when I was 12 years old. I had gone to summer camp. They had taken us on a field trip to the Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes. They let us out of the bus right at the bottom of the big dune climb. And we climbed all the way up that dune and we rolled back down again and we jumped off the high places. And then our counselor challenged us to go all the way out to the edge of the water. Well, it's about a 3-mile hike to get out to the edge of the water, and we hiked all the way out. And then our counselor challenged us to climb all the way down to the water to go swimming. We flew down that great big sand dune and we swam in those beautiful Lake Michigan waters until it was time to climb back up and go back to the bus. Well, all of us started to climb, but everybody kept slipping down. I was the only one that made it up to the top. My counselor said, you just keep walking on the edge and we'll follow along on the beach and we'll climb up and meet you later. We were calling back and forth to each other, but there came a time when I didn't hear any calls coming back and I was lost. I started walking in those sand dunes, not know where I was going, didn't know where the bus was or if anybody would ever find me again, until I looked out and like a mirage, I saw our other counselor who had gotten worried about us and came to find us. I ran to that counselor whose name was Lou and I wrapped my arms around him. I was so happy to see him and he saw how very upset I was. He took me to the edge of that sand dune. We sat down and he told me the story that I'm going to tell you now. A long, long time ago, across the waters of Lake Michigan, in a place that we now call Wisconsin, there lived a mother bear. We're going to do a little sign language with this story. This is mother, and this is bear. This is forest. That mother bear's name was Mishimakwa, and in Anishinaabe language, that simply means mother bear. Now, one spring, Mishimakwa, the mother bear, gave birth to 2 little bear cubs. She did that in the forests of Wisconsin. And as those 2 little cubs got bigger, they followed their mother through the forest to learn where the berries were and how to catch fish. On certain days, she showed them how to eat the berries in the forest. On other days, she took them down to the edge of the water and showed them how to catch fish. One day, the cubs looked up and they saw their mother saying thank you, but there was nothing else around them. The cubs said, "Mother, who are you saying thank you to?" And that mother bear said, "I'm saying thank you to the Great Spirit Manitou." The cubs said, "Who's that?" And the mother bear said, "The Great Spirit Manitou gave us this beautiful place to live, the forests and the waters," and she said, "Thank you." Now, during the first summer of the bear cub's life, it became very hot in that place called Wisconsin. It was so very hot that summer that all the animals were suffering in the heat. And on most days, that mother bear would take her cubs down to the edge of the water and she would let them swim. They would swim out into those waves and play in the water. And that mother bear always said the same thing: "Don't swim out too far." Doesn't she sound like a mom? Now, one night during that hot summer, they were sleeping in the forest when all of a sudden a thunderstorm started to brew out over the water. And that strong thunderstorm brought wind and waves and loud crashes of thunder and big bolts of lightning that came from the clouds. That mother bear took her cubs and hugged them close to her, and she said, "Don't be afraid. The storm will be over soon." But it wasn't. That storm was right above them, and the lightning and thunder were louder and brighter until finally a great bolt of lightning came down and struck the forest floor, and that whole forest where they lived caught on fire. All of a sudden, they were surrounded by flames. That mother bear said, "Run as fast as you can, run down to the water to get away from this fire." And with all the other animals of that forest, they ran all the way down to the edge of the water. And those bears, they followed their mother into the water and they started to swim after her. When they turned around, all they could see was that place that they had called home, and it was burning in that fire. The mother bear said, "You have to be strong. You have to keep swimming." And so all night long, they followed their mother in those cold, dark waters, swimming away from land. In the morning when the sun rose, the waves on Lake Michigan got a little bit bigger. So when that mother bear turned around, she could only see her cubs when they came to the top of a wave, and when they went down, she couldn't see them any longer. But she hoped that they were strong enough to keep swimming. In fact, she said, "There's land up ahead. We'll be there soon. You have to be strong and brave. You have to keep swimming." But she didn't see land up ahead. She kept swimming all day. And by the end of that day, the waves were so high that when that mother bear turned around to see where her bear cubs were, well, she couldn't see them anymore. But she hoped that they were back there, and she hoped that they were still swimming. Much later that afternoon, she did see land up ahead. The land that she saw was Michigan. And she pulled her big, wet, heavy body up out of the water, and she lay down on the beach, and she waited for her cubs to come. Every once in a while, she would wade out in the water and she would look for them. And then she would go right back to that place and lay down again, for she wanted to be there when they arrived. But meanwhile, way out in the waters of Lake Michigan, those two little bear cubs had gotten so very tired, they just couldn't swim any longer. They were so tired now that they stopped swimming, and very sadly enough, they slipped under the surface of the water. Now the Great Spirit Manitou looked down at the place where that mother bear was waiting. The Great Spirit Manitou looked down at the place where those two cubs had slipped underneath the water, and he did something amazing. He caused a great wind to start to blow across Lake Michigan. And as that wind blew, it caused those two little cubs to be brought up and up and up to the surface of the water, only they weren't cubs any longer. He had turned them into islands, and he named them after himself. He named them the North Manitou and the South Manitou Islands. From that day forward, the winds blew up over that mother bear until her life faded away and she became a gigantic sand dune. But from her place on the beach, she can look out and always see her two bear cubs. And we tell this story in Michigan so that we will never forget. So that we will never forget this Michigan legend called the Legend of the Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes. And that's the tale. I know that most of you have probably been to that place and maybe have your own stories of climbing there or hiking there or swimming in those waters. Maybe you've looked out at those two islands and thought about those two baby bears still trying to get to shore to be reunited with their mom. So that's a great story from Michigan. So we're going to tell one more. It's a silly story. I love to tell this story. And I need to tell you before I tell it that when this state was new and before our statehood, this place called Michigan was covered with giant white pine trees. So many trees that people thought that they would last forever, that we could never cut them all down. But there came a time when many other people came here, came and settled in Michigan, and started to harvest the resources that were here, including the trees. And so many of those trees were cut down during a time called the lumber era. Now, in order to work in the woods during the lumber era, you were somebody called a lumberjack or a logger. And in order to cut those trees down in the North Woods, you had to be big, you had to be strong, you had to look like Nick Carlson in order to cut those trees down. That's right. Now, the lumberjacks that lived in the North Woods worked long days and they accomplished great things. And so stories started to be told in the North Woods of Michigan about one lumberjack, one logger who was stronger than all the others. He was bigger than all the others and he accomplished amazing things in our Michigan history. His name was Paul Bunyan. Now, I have told Paul Bunyan stories all across this country. And there are people in the state of Maine who tried to tell me that Paul Bunyan came from Maine. And I said, oh no, you're wrong. He came from Michigan. And I have been to the state of Wisconsin telling my Paul Bunyan stories. And people in Wisconsin will try to tell me that Paul Bunyan was born in Wisconsin. And I always have to say to them, no, you're wrong. He was born in Michigan. I've even told Paul Bunyan stories in the state of Minnesota, and they've tried to tell me that Paul Bunyan is theirs. but I've told them also you're wrong. And so tonight I'd like to start this Paul Bunyan story by telling you why Paul Bunyan is from Michigan. And then we'll get into the other story that I brought for you about him. You see, many, many years ago in the country of Russia, Paul's dad, Yvon Bunyan, was in the woods in Russia, and he was a great woodsman too. And on that day, he had a great axe in his hand, and Yvon Bunyan was cutting down a great big Siberian elm tree. That's right. Now, while he was cutting that tree down in the woods that day, a storm started to brew, a thunderstorm like the one in our last story. And that storm was so strong and the wind was so great in the woods that Yvon Bunyan hung onto that tree so he wouldn't be blown out of the woods. The wind started to blow with so much force that Yvon Bunyan climbed up in the branches of that tree and he was holding on for dear life. The wind started to blow so strong, it lifted that big elm tree up out of the ground, roots and all, and that elm tree started to fly across land and water with Yvon Bunyan holding on to the branches of that tree. He was flying too. That elm tree flew across land and water until finally that storm, well, it kind of faded out. And that elm tree came back down and landed, kapoom! And when it landed, the big vase-like branches of that elm tree cut out a place in Michigan called Whitefish Bay. And the trunk of that elm tree landed and dug out a river that we call the St. Mary's River. Now, if you look at a map of Michigan and you look for Whitefish Bay and the St. Mary's River, you're going to see where that elm tree landed. Yvon Bunyan fell out of the branches of that tree on the east bank of the Tequamanon River in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and he said, "This looks like home." And he decided to stay. He built a cabin on the Tequamanon River. He started to set trap lines, and he started to trap for fur. Now, when he had enough fur in those days, he would take those furs into Sault Ste. Marie, and he would trade them for other things that he needed. Well, the trader's daughter's name was Serafina. She was half French and half Native American. And when Yvon Bunyan met Serafina, he fell in love. They got married. They had a baby. Guess who? That's right, Paul Bunyan. So if anybody tells you that Paul Bunyan isn't from Michigan, you get out a map of Michigan and you show them Whitefish Bay and the St. Mary's River, and you show them the place where Paul's daddy's tree landed, and then point to that Tequamanon River, because that's where Paul started his lumbering. So I need you to keep that in mind, but I want to tell you a secret about Paul Bunyan that not many people know, but you're going to all know it now. When he was young, and he was never little, but when he was young, he was afraid of the dark. Not many people know that. But here's the strange thing. When Paul Bunyan grew to be the great logger and lumberjack that we've all heard stories about, he was still afraid of the dark. He never let the men in his lumber camp know that. He would just say, "Oh, the nighttime is just a plain old waste of time. You can't cut trees down when it's dark out." And he would lock himself up in his cabin, and there he would stay until he got light out again. Well, this is a story about how Paul Bunyan solved his problem about being afraid of the dark. So I want to tell you this story. When Paul Bunyan was young, he was so afraid of the dark. He used to make his ma and pa light campfires all the way around the cabin, and it would be so light out because of the fires that Paul could go to sleep, but his ma and pa had to tend those fires all night long. When he grew to be the great logger that we have all heard stories about, he was still afraid of the dark, but he never let on. Didn't want any of the men in his lumber camp know that. And so he would just tell them that the nighttime was a waste of time because you can't cut trees down when it's dark out. One morning, Paul got up with all his men in the lumber camp, and they ate an enormous breakfast like they always did to fuel their day. So the men in the lumber camp headed off to cut trees along the Tequamanon River that day, but Paul had another idea. He decided he was going to take the short hike across the Upper Peninsula all the way to the Porcupine Mountains, where he was going to mark timber that day. He put on his great big boots. He put his big axe on his shoulder. He turned, and in 3 strides, whoosh, 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 Paul was standing in the Porcupine Mountains. Oh, he loved being in those mountains, and he loved being in the woods. And that day, as he was marking trees, he lost all track of time. Until once he looked up as he came up over a ridge and that sun was going down. And Paul Bunyan started shaking with fear in his boots and he said what he always said, "Night again, terrible night." And he yelled so loud that one of those white pine trees growing in the Porkies, well, it fell down out of fear. They didn't have to cut that one down after it. It was already down. Well, Paul Bunyan decided that since it had gotten dark out, he better hightail it back to the lumber camp. And so he turned on his boots and put that axe on his shoulder, and in 3 strides, he was almost home. Whoosh, whoosh, whoa. Almost home to the lumber camp, he got an idea. It was a Paul Bunyan-sized idea. Instead of going home and locking himself up in the cabin, he decided to go back to the Porcupine Mountains in the dark. He turned with his axe, and in 3 strides, whoosh, 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 he was back in the Porcupine Mountains. He went up to the very highest peak in the Porkies. He looked up at all that dark sky above his head, and then Paul said, "Hey, night, I want you to stop." And the night stopped moving. And she spoke to Paul Bunyan in a cool, low voice. The night said, "Yes, Paul. What do you need? What can I help you with?" He said, "Oh my goodness. My mother told me that the night was a nice lady one night a long time ago when she was putting me to bed, but I never thought that it was true. You are a real nice lady. Paul Bunyan, what can I do for you?" "Well, tell me something. Tell me something, Night, because you know I'm a little afraid of you. And when it's dark out, well, we can't cut any trees down, but can you tell me, where do you hide the light? Where do you put it?" She said, "Oh, that, Paul. Well, when I come, all the light hides behind me. I can't do anything about that, and neither can you." And she stretched out her long, dark arms and draped them across the sky, and it was quiet, and Paul knew that his talk with the night was over. He turned on his boots and put his axe on his shoulder, and he headed for home. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And he was almost home, but then he turned around thinking about how his mom had told him that the night was a nice lady so many years ago, that he shouldn't be afraid of her. Oh, he didn't believe his mom, but now he did. And all of a sudden, he knew what he had to do to solve his problem. And one more time, he turned on his boots, put his axe on his shoulder, and headed back to the Porkies. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He was standing on that high peak in the Porcupine Mountains, but this time he didn't talk to her. This time, he made a pointer with his finger, and I want you to do this if you're out there listening. Make a great big Paul Bunyan pointer with your finger. He looked for the perfect spot above his head, and when he was ready, Paul Bunyan blasted a hole through the night. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. And when he pulled his finger out of the night, it sounded like this. He looked up, and there was a tiny little twinkly light right above his head. Paul had poked through the night to the light that was hiding behind it. He said, "Now that's more like it." And when Paul Bunyan saw what he could do, he started poking holes all across the sky. Now, I can't do that if you don't help me out there. So you ready? Let's poke some stars. He started heading back to the lumber camp. He poked those over Lake Superior. He poked him over the eastern end of the Upper Peninsula. He poked him over the Straits of Mackinac. He turned around and he was going to poke some holes over Lower Michigan, but he decided to let them solve their own problems. It's still that way. When Paul got done, there were thousands of twinkly little lights above his head, and Paul Bunyan said, "Now that's more like it." And he headed back to the lumber camp that night underneath the stars that he had made. But before he went into his cabin to get some sleep, he looked up and decided that he could make a little bit more light if he made a fist. Paul Bunyan made a great big fist, and right over the lumber camp, he blasted a great big hole in the night. You ready? 1, 2, 3. He pulled his fist out of that night sky. And when he did, there was a beautiful round spotlight flooding down on him, and Paul said, "That's more like it." Now, that night, before Paul had a chance to turn around and go to sleep, a strange thing happened. All the men in his lumber camp got up in the middle of the night. You see, with all the lights that Paul had made in the sky, they thought it was morning. They put their clothes on and they went off into the woods to go to work. Well, that's when Paul Bunyan created the night shift. They cut down more trees in those days than they had ever cut down before. And that's another story about the night shift. This is a story about our Paul Bunyan, the lumberjack from Michigan, who made all the stars and the great big moon. So the next time you're outside and you see those stars twinkling, or you look up at that great big full moon, I want you to thank Paul Bunyan for what he did for us so many years ago. And that's a story. Good job out there, you guys. Thanks for helping poking stars. Awesome. So we're going to end our time together tonight by learning and singing the Michigan song. When I was a 6th grade teacher at Rather Elementary School in Ionia, Michigan, we celebrated Michigan Week by holding a huge Michigan breakfast. And it was always the job of the 6th graders to sing the Michigan song for everybody who came to our breakfast. So there's only 4 lines to the song. I'll sing each line. You sing them back out there. And we'll put all 4 of those lines together and sing the Michigan song. So this is the first line, my turn. Michigan, my Michigan, homeland for me. Ready? Your turn. Michigan, my Michigan, homeland for me. Second line. Michigan, my Michigan, land of fantasy. Ready? Michigan, my Michigan, land of fantasy. Third line. Land of sky blue waters, land of lakes and trees. Land of sky blue waters, land of lakes and trees. Last line. Michigan, my Michigan, home sweet home for me. Michigan, my Michigan, home sweet home for me. Let's put it together. Michigan, my Michigan, homeland for me. Michigan, my Michigan, land of fantasy. Land of sky blue waters, land of lakes and trees. Oh, Michigan, my Michigan, home sweet home for me. Hope you were singing out there. Thanks, you guys. One of my favorite songs. So we're going to end our time tonight by blowing out the story lamp. And I need to tell you how that family that told so many stories around it would blow it out at the end of a long night of stories. Their mom would look up. She would say, it's time to make our wish. Only the wonderful thing about this tradition is that they never made a wish for themselves. They always made a wish for somebody else, somebody they cared about. You see, a lot of their relatives were still way over in Finland, and they would think about them on those nights when they told stories from home. So I want you to think of somebody you really care about. And then I want you to think of a wish that you want to give to that person tonight. A happy thought or a good wish. And when you're ready, look at me in the screen, and I'll see you looking back at me out there. And we'll blow the story lamp out. But that doesn't mean the stories are over. The stories are never over as long as you keep telling them and sharing them with each other. So make a wish for somebody that you really care about. Are you ready out there? Got your wishes? All right. I hope all your wishes come true. You guys take good care of yourselves and each other. Hopefully this time that we're in will be over soon, and you and I will be in a room together sharing stories live, face to face. I hope so soon. Take good care of yourself. Thanks for coming tonight. All right. We'll see you later. All right. Thanks, you guys. See you, Zaylee. All right. You still there?